Fort Carson was alive with activity when Marcus Johnson stepped out of the bus that had brought him there. The air smelled faintly of dust and diesel, mixed with the distant sound of boots hitting the ground in unison. It was early morning, and the sun was just beginning to rise over the sprawling military base. Marcus took a deep breath, adjusting the strap of his duffel bag on his shoulder. He looked around at the other recruits climbing down from the bus, their faces mirroring his mix of excitement and anxiety. Marcus wasn't new to challenges. Growing up in a small town where he often felt like an outsider had taught him resilience. But this was different. This was the United States Army, a place where people came to test themselves and become something more. As he walked toward the barracks, he reminded himself why he was here. He wanted to serve, to make a difference, and to prove to himself that he could rise above anything life threw at him. The barracks were plain, functional, and cold. Long rows of bunk beds lined the walls, each one waiting for its owner to claim it. Marcus found an empty spot near the window and dropped his bag onto the lower bunk. He started unpacking quietly, folding his clothes neatly and placing them into the small metal locker beside the bed. Around him, the other recruits did the calm same, some chatting nervously, others lost in thought. It didn't take long for the sergeant to arrive. The door slammed open and in strode Sergeant Paul Carter, a tall man with broad shoulders and a permanent scowl etched onto his weathered face. His voice boomed through the room as he called everyone to attention. "Listen up," he barked. "You're not civilians anymore. From now on, you follow my orders without question, got it?" Everyone snapped to attention, standing straight with their arms rigid at their sides. Marcus stood tall, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew this moment would set the tone for everything to come. Carter began walking down the rows of recruits, inspecting them closely. His sharp eyes scanned each face, lingering longer on some than others. When he reached Marcus, he stopped abruptly. "Well, well," Carter said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "What do we have here? Another volunteer who thinks they can play soldier?" He circled Marcus slowly, his gaze piercing. "Do you even know what you're doing here, boy? Because I sure don't see a warrior standing in front of me." Marcus clenched his jaw but kept his composure. He'd heard comments like this before, though never quite so openly hostile. He reminded himself to stay calm, to focus on the bigger picture. "Yes, sir," he replied firmly. "I'm here to serve my country." Carter sneered. "Serve your country? You think they need someone like you? Maybe you should have stayed home where you belong." The words stung, but Marcus refused to let them show on his face. He stared straight ahead, his posture unwavering. The other recruits shifted uncomfortably, glancing at each other out of the corners of their eyes. No one dared to speak up. One of them, a young man named Chris Miller, watched the exchange with growing unease. Chris had noticed how Carter seemed to single out Marcus almost immediately. There was something about the way the sergeant spoke to him that felt wrong, intentional even. Chris wanted to say something to defend Marcus, but he hesitated. Standing up to a superior officer on day one didn't seem like a smart move. After what felt like an eternity, Carter finally moved on, leaving Marcus standing rigidly in place. The rest of roll call passed in a blur, with Carter barking names and assigning bunks. When it was over, the recruits were dismissed to unpack and settle in. Marcus returned to his bunk, trying to push the encounter out of his mind. He told himself it was just part of the process, that drill sergeants were supposed to be tough. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was personal. Later that afternoon, the recruits gathered outside for their first physical training session. The sun blazed overhead, turning the field into a sweltering oven. Carter led them through a series of exercises designed to push their limits. Push-ups, sit-ups, sprints. The routine left many of them gasping for air. Throughout it all, Carter kept a close eye on Marcus, making sure he struggled more than anyone else. "Come on, Johnson," Carter shouted during a particularly grueling set of push-ups. "Is that all you've got?" "My grandmother could do better than that," Marcus gritted his teeth and pushed through the pain, determined not to give Carter the satisfaction of seeing him fail. Sweat dripped from his forehead, soaking into the dirt beneath him, but he didn't stop until the whistle blew, signaling the end of the exercise. As he lay on the ground catching his breath, he noticed Chris watching him again. This time, Chris gave him a small nod of encouragement, which Marcus returned with a brief smile. That night after dinner, Carter handed out assignments for evening chores. Most of the recruits were tasked with simple duties like sweeping the floors or organizing equipment. Marcus, however, was ordered to clean the latrines, a job no one envied. Chris approached him later while Marcus scrubbed the grimy stalls. "Hey," Chris said softly, leaning against the doorway. "Need a hand?" Marcus shook his head, though he appreciated the offer. "Thanks, but I've got it. Don't want to get you in trouble." Chris nodded, understanding. "Look, I know Carter's being unfair. Just hang in there, okay? We've got your back." For the first time since arriving at Fort Carson, Marcus felt a flicker of hope. Maybe he wasn't completely alone after all. As the days turned into weeks, Carter's behavior only worsened. He found reasons to criticize Marcus constantly, whether it was the way he marched, the way he saluted, or the way he answered questions. Each insult chipped away at Marcus's patience, but he refused to let it break him. Instead, he poured all his energy into excelling at every task, determined to prove Carter wrong. During a weapons training session, Marcus demonstrated exceptional skill with a rifle, earning praise from Lieutenant Emily Dawson, who oversaw the exercise. "Good work, Johnson," she said with a smile. "Keep it up." Carter bristled at the compliment, glaring daggers at Marcus. Later, during a debriefing, he accused Marcus of cheating, claiming he must have received outside help. Marcus denied the accusation calmly, knowing full well it wasn't true. Lieutenant Dawson intervened, defending Marcus and reminding Carter to focus on facts rather than assumptions. Despite the constant pressure, Marcus found strength in unexpected places. Chris continued to support him, offering quiet encouragement whenever he could. Even a few of the other recruits began warming up to Marcus, impressed by his determination and unwillingness to back down. Slowly but surely, Marcus started to carve out a place for himself within the unit. But Carter wasn't done yet. Every victory Marcus achieved seemed to fuel the sergeant's anger, pushing him to escalate his tactics. Late-night drills, impossible standards, veiled threats. It was clear that Carter viewed Marcus as a personal challenge, someone to crush underfoot. And yet, no matter what Carter threw at him, Marcus refused to break. One evening, after another exhausting day, Marcus sat on his bunk staring at the ceiling. He thought about his father, General Harold Johnson, a man known throughout the military for his integrity and commitment to equality. Marcus wondered what his father would think if he saw him now, enduring such blatant discrimination. Would he be proud of how Marcus handled himself, or disappointed that he hadn't fought back harder? Before he could dwell too much on those thoughts, Chris appeared beside him. "How you holding up?" he asked. Marcus sighed. "I'll survive. It's not the first time I've dealt with stuff like this." Chris frowned. "Still, no one deserves to be treated that way. If Carter keeps this up, he's going to cross a line sooner or later." Marcus nodded, knowing Chris was right. Something had to change. But for now, all he could do was keep moving forward one step at a time. And so, despite the odds stacked against him, Marcus pressed on. Little did he know, the real battle was only. The weeks passed slowly at Fort Carson, each day blending into the next under the relentless sun or biting wind. For Marcus Johnson, every morning began with the same routine. Wake up before dawn, lace his boots tightly, and prepare himself mentally for whatever Sergeant Paul Carter had planned. The harassment hadn't stopped. If anything, it had grown worse. But Marcus wasn't about to give up. He knew that quitting would mean letting Carter win, and Marcus refused to let that happen. One particularly grueling morning, the recruits were tasked with completing an obstacle course designed to test their strength, endurance, and teamwork. The course stretched across a wide field, filled with towering walls, muddy trenches, and swinging ropes suspended over water pits. As they lined up at the starting point, Carter paced back and forth, shouting instructions and insults. "Move fast, maggots," he barked. "Anyone who fails will do push-ups until their arms fall off." Marcus took a deep breath, focusing on the task ahead. He glanced at Chris Miller, who gave him a quick thumbs up. Despite the tension between them and Carter, the recruits had started to form a bond. They weren't just individuals anymore, they were a team, even if that team was still shaky. When the whistle blew, the group surged forward. Marcus moved quickly, scaling the first wall with ease and landing lightly on the other side. He helped another recruit, a quiet guy named Ryan, get over the barrier before sprinting toward the next challenge. By the time they reached the rope swing, Marcus was leading the pack. He grabbed the rope confidently, swung out over the water pit, and landed safely on the platform beyond. Carter watched all of this with growing irritation. He couldn't understand how Marcus managed to excel, despite the constant pressure. When Marcus crossed the finish line first, Carter stormed over, his face red with anger. "What's this?" Carter snapped, pointing at Marcus. "How did you manage to come in first? Did someone help you cheat?" Marcus stood tall, meeting Carter's glare without flinching. "No, sir," he replied calmly. "I finished because I worked hard." Carter scoffed. "Hard work? Don't make me laugh. You think you're better than everyone else, don't you?" Before Marcus could respond, Lieutenant Emily Dawson approached. She had been observing the exercise from a distance and stepped in to diffuse the situation. "Sergeant Carter," she said firmly, "Johnson performed exceptionally well. If you have doubts about his abilities, perhaps we should run the course again." Carter hesitated, clearly caught off guard. After a moment, he muttered something under his breath and agreed to a retest. Later that afternoon, Marcus ran the course once more, this time with even greater determination. He shattered his previous time, finishing so far ahead of the others that even Carter couldn't deny his skill. But instead of earning respect, Marcus's success only made Carter angrier. That evening, during dinner, Carter singled him out again, assigning him extra duties like cleaning the mess hall after hours. Marcus accepted the punishment silently, knowing it was pointless to argue. He focused on staying strong, reminding himself why he was here. As the days went by, tensions within the squad grew. Some recruits, like Chris and Ryan, openly supported Marcus, admiring his resilience. Others, however, sided with Carter either out of fear or prejudice. One of these recruits was Alex Roberts, a wiry young man who seemed eager to please the sergeant no matter what. Alex often echoed Carter's criticisms, muttering things like, "Maybe he doesn't belong here," whenever Marcus excelled at something. This division created friction during team exercises. During a nighttime navigation drill, the squad was supposed to work together to find specific checkpoints using maps and compasses. But when Marcus suggested a route, Alex argued against it loudly, causing confusion among the group. They ended up losing valuable time and finishing last, a failure that Carter blamed entirely on Marcus. "You see what happens when you rely on amateurs?" Carter shouted afterward. "Stick to following orders, Johnson, and leave the thinking to people who actually know what they're doing." Marcus clenched his fists but kept his mouth shut. He knew arguing wouldn't help. Instead, he turned to Chris later that night, venting his frustrations privately. "I can handle Carter," Marcus said, pacing back and forth in the barracks. "But it's getting harder when half the squad acts like I'm the problem. Doesn't matter how hard I try. They always find a way to blame me." Chris listened quietly, nodding sympathetically. "I get it, man. It's not fair. But you're killing it out there. Everyone sees it, even if they won't admit it. Just keep doing what you're doing. Eventually, they'll have no choice but to respect you." Marcus appreciated Chris's words, but he couldn't shake the feeling that things were reaching a breaking point. The stress of dealing with Carter's hostility day after day was wearing on him. Late one night, as he scrubbed the latrines yet again, Marcus allowed himself a rare moment of doubt. Was all this worth it? Would he ever truly fit in here? His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind him. Turning, he saw Ryan standing in the doorway, holding a mop. "Mind if I join you?" Ryan asked awkwardly. Figured 2 sets of hands might make this go faster. Marcus hesitated, then nodded. "Sure, thanks." They worked in silence for a while, scrubbing tiles and emptying trash bins. Finally, Ryan spoke up. "Look, I know Carter's being a jerk, And I know some of us haven't exactly made things easier for you, but I want you to know I've got your back. You're a good guy, Marcus. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Marcus looked at Ryan, surprised by the unexpected show of support. Thanks, he said simply. That means a lot. Small moments like this kept Marcus going. Even though Carter continued to target him, Marcus found strength in the friendships he was building with Chris, Ryan, and a few others. Together, they formed a tight-knit group that stood apart from the rest of the squad. They trained together, shared meals, and encouraged each other through the toughest parts of basic training. Still, Carter wasn't done trying to break Marcus. One evening, after lights out, he called Marcus into his office for a private conversation. The room was small and sparsely furnished, with a desk cluttered with papers and a single chair facing Carter. Marcus stood at attention, waiting for whatever lecture or punishment was coming next. "Sit down, Johnson," Carter said gruffly, motioning to the chair. Marcus obeyed, sitting stiffly on the edge of the seat. Carter leaned back in his own chair, studying Marcus carefully. "You're pretty good at playing the victim, aren't you?" he said finally. "Always acting like you're above everyone else, like you deserve special treatment." Marcus frowned, confused by the accusation. "Sir, I don't know what you mean. I'm just trying to do my job." Carter snorted. "Your job? Please. You strut around here like you own the place, like you're too good for the rest of us. Newsflash, kid, you're nothing. Just another recruit who thinks he's hot stuff." Marcus felt a surge of anger, but forced himself to stay calm. "With all due respect, sir, I've worked hard to earn my place here. I haven't asked for anything special." Carter leaned forward, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "We'll see how long you last, Johnson. Keep pushing, and you'll regret it." The threat hung in the air, heavy and ominous. Marcus didn't respond, knowing it would only make things worse. When Carter dismissed him a few minutes later, Marcus returned to the barracks feeling uneasy. Something about the conversation felt off. It wasn't just the usual harassment. It was something deeper, more calculated. Over the next few days, Carter's behavior shifted subtly. He stopped openly mocking Marcus in front of the squad, and instead began watching him closely, almost obsessively. Whenever Marcus excelled at a task, Carter would nod thoughtfully rather than lash out. It was as if he was gathering information, piecing together some sort of plan. Marcus noticed the change but couldn't figure out what it meant. He mentioned it to Chris one evening during a rare break. "It's weird," Marcus admitted. "He's not yelling at me as much anymore. But it feels like he's planning something." Chris frowned. "Be careful, man. If Carter's suddenly being nice or quieter, it's probably not a good sign." Marcus nodded, deciding to stay vigilant. Whatever Carter was up to, Marcus knew he needed to be ready for it. Little did he realize Carter had already begun digging into his past. Using connections within the military, Carter discovered something that sent a chill down his spine. Marcus Johnson wasn't just any recruit. He was the son of General Harold Johnson, a highly decorated officer known for advocating equality and reform within the ranks. Worse, General Johnson was scheduled to visit Fort Carson soon for an inspection. Panic set in as Carter realized the implications. If Marcus reported him, if General Johnson found out, his career would be over. Desperate to cover his tracks, Carter decided to mend fences with Marcus, hoping to smooth things over before it was too late. But Marcus wasn't fooled. When Carter suddenly started treating him with exaggerated politeness, offering praise where none was deserved, Marcus saw right through the act. He remained cold and distant, refusing to trust the man who had tormented him for weeks. Unbeknownst to both of them, the real reckoning was closer than either could have imagined. And when it came, it would force everyone at Fort Carson to confront uncomfortable truths, not just about Marcus, but about themselves. The live fire simulation was supposed to be the ultimate test of teamwork and strategy, a chance for the recruits to prove they could handle real combat scenarios under pressure. For Marcus Johnson, It felt like just another opportunity for Sergeant Paul Carter to single him out. From the moment the exercise began, Marcus knew something wasn't right. Carter had deliberately assigned Marcus to a position far from the rest of the squad, isolating him near the edge of the training field. While the others worked together to secure objectives and coordinate movements, Marcus found himself alone, forced to fend for himself against simulated enemy fire. The crackle of blank rounds echoed around him as he moved cautiously from one piece of cover to the next, his heart pounding in his chest. Marcus tried to stay focused, scanning the area for threats and doing his best to contribute to the mission. But no matter how hard he pushed forward, he couldn't shake the feeling that Carter had set him up to fail. Every time he radioed in for support, the response came too late, or not at all. It was as if the rest of the squad had been instructed to ignore him entirely. When the exercise ended, Carter wasted no time laying into Marcus. "What was that?" he barked, striding toward him with a scowl. "You were all over the place. Couldn't keep up with the squad, couldn't follow orders. What's wrong with you?" Marcus clenched his fists but kept his voice steady. "Sir, I did my best. I followed every order given to me." "Your best?" Carter sneered. "Your best isn't good enough. Maybe you should consider leaving before you embarrass yourself further." That was the last straw. Marcus snapped. He stepped closer to Carter, his eyes blazing with anger. "I'm not going anywhere," he said firmly, "and I haven't done anything wrong. You're the one who keeps targeting me because of who I am." The other recruits froze, watching the confrontation unfold. No one dared to speak or intervene. Even Lieutenant Emily Dawson, who had been observing the exercise, seemed taken aback by Marcus's boldness. Carter glared at Marcus, his face turning red. "Watch your tone, recruit. Accusing a superior officer? That's insubordination." "It's the truth," Marcus shot back, "and everyone here knows it." Before things could escalate further, Lieutenant Dawson stepped in. "Enough," she commanded, her voice cutting through the tension. "Sergeant Carter, I need to speak with you privately. Recruits, stand down and regroup." As Carter stormed off with Dawson, Marcus turned away, his hands trembling with a mix of anger and relief. He hadn't planned to confront Carter so openly, but the words had spilled out before he could stop them. Now, all he could do was wait and see what would happen next. Later that evening, Lieutenant Dawson pulled Marcus aside for a private conversation. She led him to a quiet corner of the barracks, where they could talk without interruptions. "What? You said today it was brave," she began, studying him carefully. "But it's also risky. Are you sure about what you're accusing Carter of?" Marcus nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I've dealt with this kind of treatment my whole life. I know when someone's targeting me because of my race." Dawson sighed, her expression softening. "I believe you, Marcus, and I'll look into it. But I need you to be careful. If Carter finds out you've spoken up, it could make things worse." "I understand," Marcus replied, "but I can't keep letting him get away with it." Dawson nodded, clearly impressed by his resolve. "All right, leave it with me for now. Just focus on finishing strong." Unbeknownst to Marcus, Carter had overheard part of the conversation. Standing in the shadows nearby, he listened intently, his mind racing. When Dawson mentioned investigating his behavior, Carter felt a surge of panic. He realized he was in serious trouble, and he needed to act fast. Over the next few days, Carter became increasingly paranoid. He stopped harassing Marcus altogether, instead treating him with exaggerated politeness. During drills, he praised Marcus's performance, even going so far as to call him a natural leader in front of the squad. The sudden change confused the other recruits who weren't sure what to make of it. Chris Miller noticed the shift immediately. "What's going on with Carter?" he asked Marcus one evening. "He's acting like you're his favorite now." Marcus shrugged, keeping his suspicions to himself. "I don't trust it," he admitted. "Something's off." Meanwhile, Carter began digging into Marcus's background, desperate to find a way to protect himself. Using his connections within the military, he requested access to Marcus's personnel file. What he discovered shocked him. Marcus was the son of General Harold Johnson, a highly decorated officer known for advocating equality and reform within the ranks. Worse yet, General Johnson was scheduled to visit Fort Carson soon for an inspection. Panic set in as Carter realized the implications. If Marcus reported him, if General Johnson found out, he could lose everything. Desperate to cover his tracks, Carter decided to mend fences with Marcus, hoping to smooth things over before it was too late. The next morning, Carter approached Marcus after breakfast. "Johnson," he said, his tone unusually friendly. "Can I have a word?" Marcus frowned but nodded, following Carter to a secluded spot outside the mess hall. "Look," Carter began, rubbing the back of his neck nervously. "I may have been too hard on you in the past. I want you to know I respect your dedication and skill. Keep up the good work." Marcus stared at him, incredulous. "Is that supposed to make up for everything you've done?" No, Carter stammered. "It's just, I recognize talent when I see it. You've got potential, Johnson. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Marcus didn't respond. He simply walked away, leaving Carter standing there looking anxious and defeated. Despite Carter's attempts to win him over, Marcus remained wary. He confided in Chris later that day, explaining what had happened. "He's up to something," Marcus said. "This isn't about respect, it's about saving his own skin." Chris nodded grimly. "Probably. Just don't let your guard down around him." As the days passed, the atmosphere at Fort Carson grew tense. Rumors spread among the recruits about an upcoming inspection, though no one knew exactly when it would happen. Carter became increasingly agitated, snapping at anyone who made a mistake and obsessively preparing the squad for drills and exercises. Then, one afternoon, the announcement came. General Harold Johnson would arrive at Fort Carson the following week. The news sent shockwaves through the base. Everyone scrambled to prepare, knowing that inspections could make or break careers. For Marcus, the timing couldn't have been worse, or better. On one hand, he dreaded the idea of facing his father in such a high-pressure environment. On the other hand, he saw an opportunity to expose Carter's behavior once and for all. That evening, Marcus sat alone in the barracks, staring at a photo of his father pinned to the inside of his locker. He thought about everything he'd endured since arriving at Fort Carson, the insults, the unfair treatment, the constant pressure. He wondered if his father would understand why he hadn't spoken up sooner, or if he'd be disappointed that Marcus hadn't handled things differently. Before he could dwell too much on those thoughts, Chris appeared beside him. "Hey," Chris said softly. "You okay?" Marcus sighed. "I don't know. My dad's coming and I don't know how to feel about it." Chris nodded sympathetically. "It's a lot to deal with. But you've got this, man. Whatever happens, you're stronger than anyone gives you credit for." Marcus smiled faintly. "Thanks, Chris. I needed to hear that." As the week drew to a close, anticipation filled the air. The recruits polished their boots, cleaned their weapons, and rehearsed procedures until they were perfect. Carter drilled them mercilessly, determined to present a flawless image to General Johnson. Finally, the day of the inspection arrived. The entire base buzzed with activity as soldiers lined up to greet the general. When General Harold Johnson stepped out of his car, tall and imposing in his uniform, Marcus felt a lump rise in his throat. His father looked exactly the same as he remembered, stern but kind, with a presence that commanded respect. As the inspection began, Carter hovered anxiously nearby, practically tripping over himself to impress the general. He introduced Marcus, with glowing praise, calling him a model recruit and a natural leader. Marcus stood rigidly at attention, refusing to meet his father's gaze. Later, during a Q&A session with the recruits, Marcus finally spoke up. Calmly and respectfully, he described the challenges he'd faced during training, including the discrimination he'd endured. Though he didn't name Carter outright, the implication was clear. General Johnson listened intently, his expression unreadable. Afterward, he requested a private meeting with Lieutenant Dawson, where they reviewed Carter's record and heard testimonies from the recruits. By the end of the discussion, it was obvious that Carter's days as a drill sergeant were numbered. For Marcus, the moment was bittersweet. He had exposed the truth, but it hadn't been easy. As he stood on the field afterward, watching the sun dip below the horizon, he allowed himself a small smile. He had proven himself, not just as a soldier, but as someone who could stand up for what was right, even when it was hard. And that was something no one could ever take away from him. The private meeting between General Harold Johnson, Lieutenant Emily Dawson, and Sergeant Paul Carter took place in a small, windowless office deep within Fort Carson's administration building. The walls were lined with certificates and framed photos of past inspections, reminders of the high standards expected within the military. But today, those standards were under scrutiny, and Sergeant Carter knew it. General Johnson sat behind the desk, his posture rigid and commanding. He listened intently as Lieutenant Dawson laid out the case against Carter, presenting evidence gathered from testimonies provided by Marcus Johnson and several other recruits. Dawson spoke clearly and confidently, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "Sir," she began, placing a folder on the desk, "based on multiple reports, it appears that Sergeant Carter has engaged in discriminatory behavior toward recruit Marcus Johnson. This includes verbal harassment, unfair treatment during training exercises, and deliberate isolation during critical missions." Carter shifted uncomfortably in the corner, his face pale and his hands trembling slightly. He opened his mouth to protest, but General Johnson raised a hand, silencing him before he could speak. "Let me see the testimonies," General Johnson said calmly, though his tone carried an unmistakable edge. Dawson handed over the folder, which contained written statements from Marcus, Chris Miller, Ryan, and even a few reluctant recruits who had initially sided with Carter. As General Johnson read through them, his expression remained unreadable, but the tightening of his jaw suggested he was less than pleased. When he finished reading, he leaned back in his chair and fixed Carter with a piercing stare. "Sergeant Carter," he said, his voice low and controlled, "do you have anything to say for yourself?" Carter swallowed hard, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. "Sir, I admit I may have been too tough on some recruits, including Marcus Johnson, but I assure you, it wasn't personal. It was just part of training, pushing them to their limits so they'd be ready for real combat." General Johnson arched an eyebrow. Pushing them to their limits or singling out one recruit because of his race? Carter flinched at the accusation. "No, sir, that's not what happened. I treated all recruits equally." "That's not true," Dawson interrupted sharply. "You isolated Marcus during the live fire simulation. You assigned him extra duties without cause, and according to these statements, your language toward him was unprofessional and inflammatory." Carter looked down at the floor, unable to meet their eyes. For once, his usual bravado was gone, replaced by sheer panic. He knew there was no way out of this, not with General Johnson sitting across from him, his very presence radiating authority and integrity. General Johnson stood up slowly, his towering frame making Carter feel even smaller. "Sergeant Carter," he said, his voice cutting like steel, "you've disgraced yourself in this institution. Discrimination has no place in the United States Army. Do you understand me?" "Yes, sir," Carter muttered, his voice barely audible. "Effective immediately, you will be demoted to the rank of Private First Class and reassigned to administrative duties. Furthermore, you will undergo mandatory sensitivity training and counseling. If any further complaints arise regarding your conduct, you will face discharge. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir," Carter repeated, his shoulders slumping in defeat. With that, General Johnson dismissed him, leaving Carter to leave the room in shame. Once the door closed behind him, Dawson let out a long breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you, sir," she said sincerely. This needed to be addressed. General Johnson nodded, his expression softening slightly. "It's my job to ensure fairness and accountability within the ranks. No one should endure what Marcus and the others went through. How is he holding up?" Dawson hesitated before answering. "He's resilient, sir. Takes after his father, I think." A small smile flickered across General Johnson's face. "That boy has always been strong-willed. Still, I'll need to speak with him personally. Make sure he knows we're here to support him." Later that evening, Marcus received word that his father wanted to see him. Nervous but determined, he made his way to the same office where the meeting with Carter had taken place. When he entered, General Johnson greeted him warmly, pulling him into a firm hug. "It's good to see you, son," General Johnson said, stepping back to look at him. "How are you holding up?" Marcus shrugged, trying to play it cool. "I'm fine, Dad, just dealing with things as they come." General Johnson studied him carefully, seeing right through the facade. "You don't have to pretend with me, Marcus. What happened here? It wasn't okay, and I'm proud of how you handled it." Marcus blinked, surprised by the comment. "You are?" "Of course," his father replied. "Standing up for yourself takes courage. Not everyone would have done the same, but I also want you to know that you're not alone. We're going to make sure something like this doesn't happen again, to you or anyone else." Marcus felt a weight lift off his chest. For weeks he'd carried the burden of Carter's actions on his own, worried about disappointing his father or seeming weak. Hearing those words meant more than he could express. "Thanks, Dad," he said quietly. "That means a lot." They talked for a while longer, discussing Marcus's progress in training and his goals for the future. By the time they parted ways, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew he had the strength to face them. The next morning, news of Carter's demotion spread quickly through the base. Some recruits cheered openly, glad to see justice served. Others, like Alex Roberts, kept quiet, realizing they'd misjudged Marcus and regretting their earlier support for Carter. Even Ryan, who had once doubted Marcus, approached him with an apology. "I'm sorry," Ryan said awkwardly. "I didn't stand up for you when I should have. Can you forgive me?" Marcus nodded, appreciating the gesture. "It takes guts to admit when you're wrong. Thanks for saying something." As the days passed, the atmosphere at Fort Carson began to shift. With Carter out of the picture, the recruits found it easier to work together as a team. They trained harder, pushed each other further, and started to form genuine bonds. Marcus became a natural leader among them, earning respect not just for his skills but for his character. Chris noticed the change most of all. "You've really brought us together, you know that?" he said one evening as they relaxed in the barracks. Marcus chuckled. "We did it together. Everyone stepped up. I couldn't have done it alone." Chris grinned. "Still, you're the glue holding us all together. Don't forget that." By the end of the month, the squad had transformed into a cohesive unit. Their final evaluation, a large-scale field exercise, tested everything they'd learned over the past weeks. Under Marcus's leadership, they executed their mission flawlessly, working seamlessly as a team and impressing Lieutenant Dawson. When the exercise ended, Dawson gathered them for a debriefing. "I'm proud of all of you," she said, smiling. "You've grown tremendously since day one. Remember, teamwork isn't just about completing missions, it's about supporting each other, no matter what." Marcus glanced around at his fellow recruits, feeling a deep sense of pride. They weren't perfect, but they were learning. Together, they were becoming something greater than themselves. As he walked back to the barracks that night, Marcus thought about how far he'd come. From the moment he stepped off the bus at Fort Carson to now, he'd faced countless obstacles, but he'd overcome them all. More importantly, he'd stayed true to himself, refusing to let anyone break his spirit. For the first time in a long while, Marcus felt at peace. He knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but he was ready. Ready to serve, ready to lead, and ready to prove that no matter what life threw at him, he could rise above it, all while staying grounded in who he truly was. Graduation day arrived faster than anyone expected. The weeks of grueling training, late-night drills, and endless challenges had finally come to an end. For Marcus Johnson, it was a moment of triumph, not just because he had completed basic training, but because he had done so while staying true to himself. As he stood among his fellow recruits waiting for the ceremony to begin, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. The field where the ceremony took place was decorated, with flags and banners creating a festive atmosphere despite the early morning chill. Rows of chairs were set up for family members, friends, and officers who had come to celebrate the occasion. Among them, sat General Harold Johnson, dressed in his formal uniform, his chest adorned with medals that reflected years of service. He scanned the crowd until his eyes landed on Marcus, giving him a subtle nod of encouragement. As the national anthem played, Marcus felt a lump rise in his throat. Standing there alongside his squad, he thought about everything they had been through together, the obstacles they'd overcome, the friendships they'd formed, and the lessons they'd learned. It hadn't been easy, but none of them were the same people they'd been when they first arrived at Fort Carlos. They had grown stronger, both individually and as a team. When the time came for speeches, Lieutenant Emily Dawson stepped up to the podium. She spoke passionately about the importance of perseverance, unity, and integrity. Her words resonated deeply with the recruits, especially Marcus, who remembered how she had supported him during some of his darkest moments. Then, it was Marcus's turn to speak. He had been chosen to represent his class, a responsibility he didn't take lightly. As he walked to the podium, the weight of what he was about to say settled over him. He looked out at the sea of faces, his father, his squad mates, the officers who had trained him, and took a deep breath. "Today," he began, his voice steady despite the nerves fluttering in his stomach, "we stand here not just as soldiers but as individuals who refuse to give up. Each of us faced challenges that tested our limits. Some of those challenges were physical, others mental or emotional. But we pushed through them, and now we're stronger because of it." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "I want to talk about something we don't always like to acknowledge. Adversity. We've all faced it in different ways. Maybe it was doubting ourselves, maybe it was dealing with unfair treatment, or maybe it was learning to trust the person standing next to us. Whatever it was, it shaped us into who we are today." Marcus glanced briefly at his father, then back at the crowd. Overcoming adversity isn't just about proving others wrong. It's about proving to yourself that you can rise above anything life throws at you. And when you do, you inspire others to do the same. His gaze shifted to Chris Miller, Ryan, and the rest of his squad. "To my fellow recruits, thank you for being there when I needed support, and for letting me be there for you. None of us made it this far alone. We did it together, as a team." The applause that followed was thunderous. Recruits cheered, families clapped, and even some of the officers wiped away tears. Marcus stepped down from the podium feeling lighter, as if a weight he hadn't realized he was carrying had been lifted. After the ceremony, the recruits gathered on the field to take photos and exchange contact information. Marcus found himself surrounded by well-wishers, including Chris, who pulled him into a tight hug. "You crushed that speech, man," Chris said, grinning. "Seriously, I think half the squad started tearing up." Marcus laughed. "Thanks, I wasn't sure how it would go, but I meant every word." Ryan approached next, extending his hand. "You're going places, Marcus. I'm glad I got to serve." "With you." "Same here," Marcus replied, shaking his hand firmly. "We'll stay in touch, right?" "Absolutely." As the afternoon wore on, Marcus finally managed to break away from the crowd and find his father. General Harold Johnson stood near the edge of the field, watching the festivities with a thoughtful expression. "Hey, Dad," Marcus said, joining him. General Johnson turned, a proud smile spreading across his face. "That was quite the speech. Son, you have a way with words." Marcus shrugged modestly. "Just speaking from the heart." "Well, I'm proud of you," his father said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Not just for graduating, but for handling everything with such grace and strength. Your mother would be proud too." At the mention of his late mother, Marcus felt a pang of sadness but also warmth. She had always believed in him, encouraging him to chase his dreams no matter what. In many ways, her memory had been a guiding light throughout his journey. "Thanks, Dad," Marcus said softly. "I couldn't have done it without your example. Seeing how you handled tough situations, you taught me a lot." General Johnson nodded, his eyes glistening slightly. "Remember this day, Marcus. Not just because you graduated, but because it's proof that you can handle anything. The road ahead won't always be smooth, but you're ready for it." They stood there for a moment, side by side, taking in the scene around them. The laughter of recruits echoed in the background, mingling with the sound of distant music. It was a celebration not just of their achievements, but of the bonds they had forged and the resilience they had shown. Later that evening, as Marcus packed up his belongings in the barracks, he reflected on how much had changed since his arrival. He thought about Sergeant Carter and the challenges he had faced, but instead of bitterness, he felt gratitude. Those experiences had taught him valuable lessons about perseverance, leadership, and the importance of standing up for what was right. Chris stopped by one last time before heading out. "So, what's next for you?" he asked. "I'm not sure yet," Marcus admitted. "But whatever it is, I know I'll face it head on." "That's the spirit," Chris said, smiling. "And hey, don't forget to write. We'll need updates from wherever you end up." "I will," Marcus promised. "Same goes for you." As Chris left, Marcus zipped up his bag and took one final look around the barracks. It had been home for a short time, but it held memories he would carry with him forever. With a small smile, he slung the bag over his shoulder and walked outside, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Marcus paused for a moment, breathing in the cool evening air. He thought about the future, the opportunities, the challenges, the unknowns, and felt a surge of excitement. No matter what happened, he knew he was prepared. He had proven himself, not just as a soldier, but as someone who could inspire others to do better. With that thought, Marcus stepped forward, leaving behind the past and moving toward the horizon. His journey was far from over, but he was ready to face it, one step at a time.